Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Today, I invited Leah, my friend, who's also a project manager and a product manager in a business that does IT work. And like everybody else in this room, Leah wasn't born in Australia, so I thought it would be relevant and hopefully interesting to hear her story about coming to Australia and then starting a career in IT in Australia. And pulling it off, she'll give you the good and the bad and the ugly about it. And that's it. I hope you enjoy it. After this talk, Andrea will take over and you continue with your normal manage. What is it? Project risk?
Yes,
so week 1 of manage risk. All right. So hi, Leah.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Good morning.
All right. So before we get into Australia and IT and project management, if you can just tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you were raised, what's it look like there?
Sure. So I was actually born in Switzerland, and I have a Swiss mother, an English father. So I was born there, and then I lived there till I was 6 and moved to the UK. So when people say, where am I from? I always say England, because that's kind of where I was born and raised. And I went to school in England. I went to university in England. I studied economics, not because I had any great desire to be an economist or anything like that, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I thought it would be a useful subject. So I studied economics at the University of Warwick in England and graduated in 2001. I still wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, so I did the traditional graduate thing, and I did the recruitment rounds and got a job in an investment bank as a risk analyst. So I joined their graduate program, which is like a 2-year rotation across different areas. And through that, I sort of fell into being a business analyst, which I loved. It's very analytical. You're looking at business processes and how you can improve things and talking to users of systems. So I really, really enjoyed that. And I was doing that for a couple of years, looking after the credit risk systems as a business analyst. And then the bank started a big new program to create a new risk management system to meet new regulatory requirements that were coming out, called Basel. And they didn't really have anyone to project manage it, so they got me to do it, and I didn't know better at the time than to say no. And it was way over my head. You know, I was maybe like 26 at the time and had no project management experience. But to the bank's credit, they then put me through training, and I got to do courses. I did all the PMBOK courses. I never actually took the exams, but I did all of that training and was responsible for the delivery of this new system in the bank. And then I was doing that till about 2011 and left my job when my daughter was born, not because I had to, it was a choice. I wanted to be at home while my daughter was young. So I gave up my career and very intentionally walked away from that world. And then I moved to Australia. Well, do you want to go on to Australia?
Yeah, it's fine. All right, so you got your degree, and then you had your experience working at, I assume it was a pretty good position to be in, right? You were paid well?
Yes, yeah. It was a bank, so I mean, it was,
So you were killing it at a young age, making top.
But trapped in that cycle, there's definitely this cycle where you think, you're doing it. No one's working there because they love it. They're doing it for the financial remuneration, basically. You sell your soul. So I was working really, really long hours.
You sell your soul.
Yeah.
Well, what's long hours? What time do you start? What time do you finish?
Well, the project, right in the midst of the issues, because obviously, and again, another problem with project management, I was given responsibility for it, but at that point, the deliverables had already been agreed, the timescales were already agreed, and everything was sort of fixed. So I just had to make something impossible happen. And I would work, say 8 to 8 was kind of standard. There'd be weekend work sometimes.
So 12 hours at work plus weekends.
Yeah, but so this was all before the financial crisis, and it was, that was what people did. I don't know what it's like now, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it was in those heady days where it was just the norm to work like crazy, and in return for a good wage.
And so the projects were managed using a project management software or Excel or just emails? Or?
Well, back then we were using Microsoft Project, which I don't think anybody uses anymore.
No, they do. They still
they
do.
do, really? I was wondering about that. Okay.
MS Project Professionals now.
Okay, yeah. And it was a very waterfall methodology, so it was very fixed, and it was all done the right way. So you had all of the documentation in place, and you would finish one section and get that signed off, and then we'd start the requirements definition and then the functional definition. It was all done sort of step by step. And I sort of look at how it would be done now. It would be approached in a completely different fashion.
Because of Agile.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that way of doing projects, I think, has fallen out of favour. And when I look back at some of the problems that they had, that directly because of this approach where, IT would sort of build something, and then at the point that they gave it to the customer was like, well, this isn't really what we wanted. But by that point, 6 months of development had gone into it. So it was very expensive to then undo and try to fix.
Yep. Okay, so you had your first child, you decide you want to make a change in your life, and you pull out from that career, you step down, and then you decide to go on an adventure and move to Australia or traveling. And then, so in Australia, you didn't have a job initially, or the first few years?
No, so I was at home raising the kids. And then I started to think about getting back into the industry, but I actually just felt it was going to be a really difficult thing to do for a few reasons. One of them being that I had no professional network or contacts in this country. And that's probably a situation that a lot of you are in as well. And it is difficult because in Australia, I think it's really super important to have those contacts. That's kind of how people do business. Like in London, it was very much more a meritocracy, and you would submit your resume. If you're the best person for the job, you get the job. It's all done by the book. Whereas in Australia, it's more about knowing the right person, which makes it very difficult, but not impossible. So, but I decided, I was at home with the kids. I did some other things. I studied horticulture in the meantime, thought I'd give my hand at doing that. But ultimately, again, it was a financial decision that I decided to try and get back into the industry to earn a proper income.
So what happens when you're away from the market for how many years?
It was 9 years.
9 years, not working. So what happens in your mind, in your head? How do you perceive going back to work?
It felt huge. And I mean, a lot has changed in technology in that time. So I got back to work on my first day, and, there was Slack and there were all these tools that people use, and they're communicating online constantly. Whereas back in my last professional position, Blackberries were really technologically advanced. So that was a huge shift. And just the expectations and culture around, like, you don't phone someone on the telephone unless it's really, urgent. You send them a Slack message. And if you pick up the phone to call them, they think something terrible has happened. So there was a lot of adjustment in that way. And I had, it's a particularly female trait as well, I think, imposter syndrome, where I'd been out of the workforce for so long. I thought, I don't have anything to offer. I'm no good at this. They'll see through me, all of that. And that it takes a lot of work to work through that. But at the same time, I think the culture here is very supportive of that once you're in a position. Okay,
so how, if you can describe how you went from being a stay-at-home mother to 2 children, out of the workforce for 9 years, how do you go from that to landing a job as a project manager? What does it take?
Good question. It takes a lot of, networking. And I think it's really, really important to invest time and energy into networking. And so that will be going to, those meetup groups that are industry specific.
Is that what you did?
I went to events, and my first job actually came out completely by chance. I went to an event that was designed to get people into coding, women into coding. And at this event, I started talking to a guy there whose company sponsored the event. And I told him my background and what I did, and we connected. And he obviously thought I had some skills that would be useful to his company. And we stayed in contact, and at first nothing really arose out of it, and then he was sort of ready to offer me a position and I decided not to, and then we went back and forth a few times. But after, I'd say 2 years, he called me and said, hey, look, this position's come up again, are you interested? And I said yes, and so that was my first role. But the other thing I would say is it's important with your first role to kind of take what you're offered, which is probably not the advice you'd normally get, but you've got to get your foot in the door. And once your foot is in the door, it's so much easier then to move on and to get something decent. Because this company, I'll be honest, I think the business model that he uses is to get people in, doesn't pay them particularly well, make you feel grateful that you've got a job, and then they move on. And that's the business model that worked for him. But it meant I could get my foot in the door. It would have been a lot harder to get a position where I was expecting a decent salary, they'd expect proper experience and whatnot. So I took this job knowing that I was going to do it for a while, make some contacts, and then move on. And that's what I did.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. So my experiences as well as an employee, job seeker, and both as an employer, is that when somebody sits in front across the table from you and they're already employed, they're in business, they know how things are done today, because they work for whatever company, they're in a stronger bargaining position to somebody who is at home, and I've got nothing, I'm watching TV, but I know I'm really good, but I'm not really sure if I can pull it off, but I know I used to be good, and all that sort of vibe or mindset, as opposed to somebody who's working for a company and they want to move up the ladder, they want to do more, they want to advance their career. I think it's a totally different starting position to your bargaining of proposition. So I totally know, I get what you're talking about. I think it's a really good advice. If you want to get into an industry, just go out there and do it, and you start even if the job is not perfect. I have a friend who once worked 3 months for free for somebody, and he just knocked on the door and he said, I want to work for you. They said, we don't have a position for you. He said, you don't need to pay me. I'll do whatever you tell me. And he did. He worked for 3 months, and then they kept him on because he was good. They didn't pay him millions, but he got into the industry. So he just did whatever it took. And I think that's a really valuable tip.
It gives you, you're going into it with intention as well. So while I was in that role, so in that job, I was looking after a portfolio of about 20 different projects. And so every time I spoke to one of my clients, I was speaking to them thinking, one day I might want to work for you.
Okay, so what was the position?
Well, so it was a project management role, but I was looking after the delivery of software to 20 to 30 clients, which is far more than one person can do effectively.
Is it the same software or is it different projects?
No, each project was a different client and different software. And mostly we were doing maintenance on the systems. They weren't big software, new builds.
What do you mean by software? A website, a CMS? What is it?
It's a combination. So the company is a boutique Ruby on Rails house, which that's a language. So they looked after all kinds of applications using that software, coding language. And so some of them were e-commerce sites, some of them are learning platforms. It was a real mix of different kinds of software.
So pretty much they'll take any project.
Yes, exactly.
And then they'll figure it out.
Yes, which brings me on to, we can talk about that more as well.
I once worked for a person, and the whole company was him and me, a salesperson, and two designers and 2 developers. And what he would do is he would dress up real nice. He had a really nice suit. He studied in London, so he had a lot of words in English. I'm from Israel, so I don't know, it's worth more over there. And he was really good at sales. He could sell anything to anybody, and he would go with that salesperson that he recruited, and they would just sell everything to big companies, like I'm talking big pharmaceutical. And then we had the office was a room the size of this room, and he would come back, say, we had the best meeting, we landed this contract here, now you just have to do this 3D video, 3 minutes in combustion in Maya, and all those 3D software. I said, who's going to do it? Nobody knows how to do it. It takes like 5 years just to master one of those. What are you talking about? Yeah, you're the project manager. That's what I'm paying you for. You'll find somebody. And by the way, we need it done in 4 weeks. It's like a 3-month project. What are you talking about?
And that was one of the biggest frustrations in that job. Was he would my boss was very good at sales, and so he would say whatever he needed to say to get the business, even if we couldn't deliver it. And so he would promise unrealistic deadlines, unrealistic deliverables, and then say to me, here, this is what we're going to do, make it happen. And so I was dealing with fixed cost, fixed scope, the only other variable is the quality. And that became such a huge issue to deal with. But it's also very common in project management, I think, because it's senior management who set those variables often, and then you just have to work within those.
Okay, so while we're on that point, in this course, we teach in accordance with our alignment with the PMBOK, which you have taken courses as well. So we teach that a project begins with a project charter. Okay, so it's the documents that's been signed off by the sponsor, and there's a rough order of magnitude estimating roughly the cost, the duration of the project, the time needed to deliver it, and the scope. So, for example, in construction, Andrea can do a better job at it than me, but I'll just say we're building a 3-bedroom house in Currumbin Valley, and it's going to cost us $600,000, and it's going to take 9 months to deliver. Okay, an example. So in that company, your job as a project manager, managing 20 clients or 20 projects, what did the equivalent to a project charter look like? How was it signed off? How were the requirements captured?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I first joined, it was very vague and very loose, precisely because my boss was basically, his modus operandi was just to promise whatever was needed in order to get the business. So the charter would be very vague on details, but it would have the price in there. It would have as little as possible in there about what we'd actually deliver, so that he wasn't sort of, committed to anything. But one of the things I tried to do was to influence him to realize the benefits in actually scoping it out properly, rather than just signing up to something vague, because unclear expectations, I think, is one of the worst things as a project manager. Like, you have to make sure that your customer has similar expectations to what you're delivering. It doesn't do anyone any favors to be working on different understandings of what you're actually going to do, because it's always going to come back and bite you on the ass. And you don't want unhappy customers, which is what you're going to get if they think what you're going to deliver is different to what you know that you're going to deliver. So he was always over-promising and under-delivering, which it's just not sustainable.
But did you have a project charter, the actual document, or what did you use?
Well, it wasn't called a charter, it was the proposal, and that it's what got signed off.
So it's the quote?
It was a quote, yeah. But so I started to work to move to adding in more detail where possible. So I'd spend more time doing definition at the beginning, but also introducing an understanding in there that as we learn things as we go along, the price may change, because we don't know. So I'll sort of make clear what we don't know yet, and then as we discover things, we would need to revisit the proposal.
Okay.
Yeah, can I add something?
Yeah.
I think that the main challenge for a project management is to deal with that, because from my experience in talking with friends in project management, usually we know the theory, everything to be done, but usually someone else, usually our boss, is totally out of this scope. So I think the main challenge for the project manager is to put all the theory to be running into a place like this, because it's really hard. I always see, as she told, the deadlines and some unrealistic things, and said, oh my God, everything that we studied, and said I would like a project charter, a beautiful project charter, and we don't have it once, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think this is really hard.
I think you're right. And on that, I think one of the things I learned that I wish I'd sort of picked up earlier is that it's not on you to take on the world's problems and solve them. So management might be giving you an impossible task, and it's actually okay and really important to stand up and say, this is not possible for these reasons. These are our options. We can either cut this, or cut this. because otherwise you're just setting yourself up to fail if you go, okay, and then, and it's so stressful, you know, then going, how on earth am I going to solve this? And even now, like there are times when management make decisions that I'm like, this is setting us up for failure. We can't deliver. We're exposing ourselves to all these risks. But now I go, okay, that's fine. That's their choice. As long as I make really clear that these are the risks and that this is what may happen, it's not my problem anymore, because I can go, you know, they're like, why did this happen? I'm like, well, I told you, I explained the risks. And so I think if there's one of the most important things to keep doing as a project manager is to make sure that you keep a register of the risks and dependencies on your project, because those are the things that can come back to bite you. And as long as you make sure that senior management and the stakeholders know those as they come up, you know, you're covering your own back, basically.
Okay, so with that first job, did you run agile projects, or what was it like?
Do you mean the first job in Australia?
Yeah,
or
in Australia.
In Australia. Well, actually, there was very little structure to them at all. And so one of the things I did was try to bring in more structure and sort of standard operating procedures and make sure that we're all working in a streamlined way so that people knew what was happening and when.
So how did they run the project before you came?
It was very disorganized, and it was my boss. So there wasn't a project manager before.
There was no project manager?
No. And so it was a complete mess, because the boss of the company, who used to be a developer himself, he would just kind of give tasks out to developers. But then, you know, there are 20 projects and they're all pretty small, but 5 developers trying to manage work on 20 projects and getting all these little tickets here and there, trying to figure out what to do, it just doesn't work. So all the customers are unhappy. Everyone's going, why is this like this? Why haven't I had this delivered? You promised me this, constantly. And so I tried to create a structure. One of the first things I did was to say, okay, we're working in fortnightly sprints, which again is an agile term. But we would say we're setting out the work for the next 2 weeks and we're locking it in, and then any changes or anything additional has to wait for the next 2 week sprint to be started on. Whereas before that, it was basically whoever shouted the loudest got to the top of the queue.
So that's the biggest difference between waterfall methodology and project management delivery. So you don't have to wait for a phase in a project to be finished to start a new one. You just say what we're going to do in the next 2 weeks, and then iteration, and do it again and again. So you do that, and then you decide what goes into the next 2 weeks. I know you have your experience as well with that, Diego. He always corrects me when I say something wrong. So, no, you got this wrong. No, you don't do that meeting now. You do that. So I respect that. So that's the difference between agile and waterfall. I think what Leah's describing is not waterfall either. I think it's called chaos.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't. There was just no methodology. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So once you started bringing in structure, how would you manage time estimates? Like, how did that work? And what did the schedule look like? And how did you approach it?
Again, when we started, there were no estimates really done, but we would sit down once a fortnight as a team, and I'd say, this is the work that we are looking at. And I would ask the developers to say, how long do you think this task will take? How long do you think this task will take? And that was eye-opening for my boss as well, because he always thought, of course they can do all this. But then when you actually assign time to each task.
So he assumed for them that they would need 2 hours to finish something?
Yes.
He never asked them?
No. And so I was actually asking the developers. And then, of course, often my boss would go, no, that shouldn't take him that long. It should take him half that time. But then you have the conversation and they explain why. And then invariably it did take that long. And people are pretty trustworthy, you know, like people weren't, he was really worried that people would take the piss and sort of just be really slow, but it's in no one's interest to be unproductive. So that wasn't the case at all. And then the other part of it was resource allocation. So the senior developers, obviously, they were wanted for more work than the junior developers. And it's a case of making sure that everybody had enough work over that 2 week period and not to over allocate to any particular person.
What is the system that the developers use to manage the tasks? Do you know?
We started using Monday.com, which is a tool where you can actually do resource allocation within it. But there's all sorts of tools out there. And I actually don't think the tool is as important as just making sure that you're doing it somehow. It can be in Excel, to be honest.
Okay, but the team use like something Kanban or like it to manage the tasks, because they have 20 different projects and a huge number of tasks that was developed as they knows, but I don't know. It's like a Kanban with a huge number of tasks, and just how I work in this task. Because you told me that there is a meeting each fortnightly. Maybe it's a kind of planning everything that they will do in this short period. Is it?
Yes, yeah. And so the software that those tasks are planned in is called UTrack, which is it's similar to Jira, which you guys may or may not have heard of. That's kind of the biggest version of that. But it's they have boards where you can you can put the tasks up, you can split them out by person, by project. There's lots of different ways of representing the data. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Yeah.
All right. So you're in that new job in Australia the first time after 9 years. It's chaos. You start bringing structure. Was the salary fair for what?
No. And that's what I mean was I took the job because I needed to get in the industry. My boss knew that at the time. It was way below what is a reasonable wage, but and at the time I said, okay, this wouldn't be acceptable, but I take it that I'm unknown and you're taking a risk as well. So we agreed verbally that after my 6-month probation that we would review it more in line with the industry standard. And at that 6 month, I said, hey, I've done this, I've brought you this value, delivered this. Can we please have that discussion and review it? And he didn't want to, and that's why I left, truthfully. So through that period, I've been making contacts with my clients, and there were 20. So I got to know a lot of different people. And once I made the decision to leave, I handed in my resignation and then approached one of the clients who I felt I knew that they sort of needed a project manager internally as well, and they offered me a role. So that worked really well.
Okay, so if I'm connecting the dots, first education, because you did do, PMBOK training, and you did have, you know the language. Yeah. You know what scope meant, you know what milestones meant, and you know all these concepts of, task allocations and prioritization and, resources. You did the networking to get to somebody who knew about a position that you could apply for, and then you did a good job at it, and you created you nurtured and you built relationships with clients to open more options for yourself. And that actually paid off because they were interested. Okay, so that's very good. So that brings us to job number 2, which is a higher paying job.
Actually, I have another thing to add just on the getting a job, and I've seen this more now that I'm in my current job and we've been recruiting. And I just think, if I was in your shoes looking for a job, I would want to know. Sorry. Making me feel self-conscious now. I was okay till he laughed. Carry on. I think it's really important to reach out to recruiters and build relationships with them as well. Don't just go on to Seek and apply for jobs invisibly and anonymously. Find specialist recruiters who specialize in, if you want to go into software project management, recruiters that specialize in software recruitment. If you're going into construction, find specialist recruiters in that and phone them, speak to them, ask to have meetings with them. They're usually really happy to do that because it's in their interest to find good talent as well. And again, they work through relationships. So we work with recruiters and they're like, oh yes, I know just the person for you. And they'll go and phone someone. So most of the jobs we've sought people for haven't even been put onto websites like Seek, and that's done through connections and contacts. So I know it's a really daunting thing to do, but if you can build those networks with recruiters, I think that's really, really worthwhile. Yeah,
I find it too with my job seeking ventures. That there's a few recruiters that when I applied for a sick job, sometimes I didn't get a lot of interest or I wasn't successful. But then recruitment agencies would then approach me and I said, okay, I'm adding you to my talent bank. And then they would just contact me when there was something available and then they would try to, put it together. So That's true, because a lot of you, I sometimes have conversations with, and you say, oh, I have this experience in, I don't know, civil engineering or construction project management, or I don't know, and you studied in good universities and you have what it takes, but you need to connect it to something here, because it's just up in the air and nobody knows what you did before. So what Leah is saying, I've never done it myself. I've never worked on developing relationships with recruiters, but I think it's probably a good tip in this country, and I think that's how it works. Yeah, so that's, if you have something, a niche, something that you're specialized in and you know what you're doing, then it's probably a really, really good thing to have.
And also just really make sure that your resume has perfect English in it, because as a recruiter, I know that when I get them and, the English is broken or it's not, doesn't read fluently, I think, well, this is their best shot, and everyone has you can ask people, you can spend time refining, and if they haven't put that effort into the resume, I think, well, that speaks a lot for the sort of work that they will do. So it makes a massive difference. So try and make sure that your resume's English is absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I think one point, I don't know, like in my case, for example, is the visa case. I think it's the main thing, because the student visa just have part-time. So especially because like my area is very like specific area. So like they can't recruit me like to work more than what is allowed to do. Do you know what I mean?
Well, what is your field? What do you do?
It is healthcare.
Healthcare,
yes. So it is a thing that sometimes like, oh, you're good, but like you can only, and like to do a sponsorship is too expensive for the companies, or sometimes like they just. So I think the good thing is sometimes like find a way to get a visa that you can work full time, like maybe a skilled visa or something like this.
But even without that, it's possible. So if I tell you a story, I won't mention names, but so there was a student who was actually a student here, and we were looking for someone with certain skills, and I knew that this person had the skills. So I've connected us, and he ended up working part-time for the company that basically the boss that takes advantage of people. So again, he wasn't being paid properly. It wasn't a great working environment. But
you can just be there,
and so he was working.
Experience.
And so he was working 20 hours a week, and eventually the boss actually agreed to sponsor him. There wasn't even really a job at the end of it, certainly not a full-time role, but this person said, I will pay you the costs of the visa. You don't have to have a position available at the end of the process. You just need to show that you need somebody at that time and that you have the intention to hire. And this person now has got permanent residency through that. So it can happen. It is really, really hard, but don't lose hope. Yeah.
And that also circles back to the point you were making before about getting your foot in the door. You just got to start. You just got to do it. Yeah, it's not going to be maybe pretty in the beginning, but. All right, so the second job, situation is she moves from the chaotic company that's underpaid and everything, but now she has the experience because she's managed 20 clients and projects, and she's got the languages back. She's brushed off all the dust, right? From 9 years of not being in the industry. She knows the new tools, she knows the language, she knows people, she knows how they do things. Culture. In UK work culture in here?
Oh, it's so different, so different. And I mean, in a lot of ways, Australian culture is better, but it can also be infuriating sometimes, especially as a manager. The biggest difference I've already touched on, which is that the UK is very much a meritocracy, and you're hired on your skills and you're expected to deliver according to very set criteria, and it's very serious. Whereas here it's much more relaxed, and it really is about who you know, even though it shouldn't be. And you get a job, and then it's very much sort of, oh, she'll be right. There's not the same culture of accountability and whatnot that you would see. I mean, London is probably opposite extreme, I would say.
The office in the morning, how people talk to you, how they carry out their work, the hours. How is that different?
Well, again, I mean, the hours culture is different in that, but again, I'm comparing sort of 10, 15 years ago and very high in a difficult industry that was renowned for long hours. So it's hard to really compare the same. But I would say, again, in the UK, people are much harder working. Australians are very relaxed and laid back. And so, I mean, truthfully, we find our foreign hires are so much more willing to work and put in the hours than their Australian counterparts. And I spend a lot of my day actually trying to get the Aussies to do something. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, it is what it is. It's your experience, you know.
Yeah, and I think especially so on the Gold Coast, it's probably different in Melbourne and Sydney, because if you're really passionate about your career, that's kind of where people go. Whereas Brisbane and the Gold Coast, it is more laid back, and people are here for the lifestyle, so they don't live to work, they work to live. That's probably the biggest difference, is here people absolutely know that there's life outside work, which is a good thing. Yeah.
Okay, so continue with the story. So you step up from that stepping stone, which was the first job, and you land your second job with a client of the first company, and you are the first project manager there too, or were you replacing a project manager?
No, it was a new role. So the company was bringing its software development in-house, and so the software was about 18 months to 2 years old, and they'd gone through a succession of external companies and consultancies who had developed it, and they made the decision to bring it in-house. So I was setting up.
The software is their product. This is what they do and sell to customers.
Yes. And well, so I thought I was just coming in as project manager, and that was the job spec and whatnot. But I turned up on day one, and I was not only project manager, but I was also line managing a team of 3 developers and all sorts of other things. So it was, to be honest, the role is more head of IT delivery rather than just project management. And I think that's a really common thing with project management, again, is that it tends to sort of catch a lot of things. People are like, okay, they can just do these things that don't fit neatly into something else.
Were you given a job description?
Yes, but again, from my experience, a job description never really relates to what you're actually going to be doing at all. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so can you describe your everyday? Like, do you go to the office? You work from home? How does it work?
Yeah, so we work 3 days from home and 2 days a week in the office in Varsity Lake. So, not too far. The team is mixed though. We have a developer who's based in Adelaide, so he's fully remote. We wanted to be an on-site team, and I say we, I mean my boss had made this decision that he wants people to be on-site in person, but we have found it really difficult to find the skills that we need locally, so we've had to hire further afield. And the nice thing about the role is because it didn't exist before, I've kind of been able to make it what I want. And I mean, my day involves talking to people constantly. That is the job ultimately. I start the day talking to people, and then I talk to people all day long, and end the day talking to people, because everybody wants a piece of information, or just to know where something's at, or to complain that something hasn't been done. And actually, that's another something that I didn't really realize when I got into project management, was about how not negative it is, but you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, because when you're doing your job well, senior management don't really know, and they don't notice because they don't know what you're doing behind the scenes to make it work well. And so they think, oh, you're not really that important, or you're not doing anything. And it's only when things are going badly, and then they're like, why aren't you doing your job properly? Why is this going badly? So I've learned to really try it, and it's not who I am naturally, but you have to blow your own trumpet. You have to, I provide weekly reports to my senior management that says what I did that week and what problems I solved, so that they can see what you're actually doing. Because otherwise they have no idea what you're doing behind the scenes. They just see that everything's fine, and they think it would have been that way regardless. So it's really important to make sure that you blow your own trumpet and are clear about what you have achieved.
What technology are you using to manage projects?
So I'm using Monday.com as my main project management tool, which I really like. It had a steep learning curve, and it's not cheap. It's a bit more expensive than some of the other tools, but you can use it for, it has good resource allocation in it as well, and lots of automations and things that you can do. If I could start from scratch, we would probably, I would have loved to use Jira, but the company was already, there were 3 or 4 different tools that were being used, partly because they'd been through this series of external consultants and everybody had their own way of doing things. So I actually felt the last thing I should do is change all of that. Like that can come later. Like the tool isn't as important as the process is. So they had all of their requirements and their backlog in UTrack. So we've kept that as the sprint management tool, and then the project management I'll do on Monday.
Okay. And so this is you running Agile projects, is that right?
Yeah, we work using an Agile methodology, and that was a big change and something. So I never really learned the theory of that in the past. So I basically arrived and was like, right, we're doing Agile, and had never really done it or learned much about it.
Did you tell them that you had experience? Like, did you kind of give them the impression that that you know what you were doing? Or?
No, and I mean the management, they didn't really know that that's the way it was either, because we just took up, what the consultants have been doing, and senior management, they're not technologically savvy at all, really. They're into healthcare and they're made up of nurses. So, and that's a nice thing because they basically let me do. They need me to do what. Yeah.
Well, what's the product? What is the
so,
they sell?
Yeah, the product is a clinical monitoring platform. So it's used in residential care facilities, and it monitors residents. So the nurses will enter in information about residents, and they'll enter in whenever residents do a bowel movement or they get weighed. I spent far too much time talking about bowel motions in my job. And then it creates alerts. So it advises the nurses when somebody needs to be looked at, or if their vitals are showing signs of concern.
Okay. So the Agile Manifesto is a set of 12 principles in Agile project management methodology. Okay. Don't get me started on whether to call it methodology or approach or framework. It doesn't matter for the sake of this talk. So I'm just going to read one by one, and then I'll see if I can connect the dots between this course and real life. And so you tell me how you do it in real life, and then maybe I'll ask Andrea, or just see how we can apply it to our course. Okay. So the first one, I'm just reading. You can find it anywhere. Just Google it, Agile Principles, and you'll find it. It's called the Manifesto. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So how do you keep your customers engaged and happy?
Well, so I mean, I talk to my customers, so I make it a point to reach out to. We have about 6 key customers, and those customers are residential care homes. So I've made a contact at each of those, and I make sure that I speak to them at least once a month. And I ask them, I say, what are your pain points with the software? What does it not do? What problems are you having with it? And they're really happy to tell me, because then they see the next month, we can push out fixes to those problems. And so that's been a really big shift since I started and we set up our in-house team, is that we actually respond to the customer's complaints. Whereas before that, they were just getting lost because there wasn't anyone in place whose job was actually to speak to the customer and hear what they want.
That's great. Can you read Pedro's comment there?
I work as ICT manager. However, 80% of my time I'm managing projects for my team and other teams, as we are in charge to deliver it. I have the same issue here where I do more PM than actual managing ICT.
Yes, it's the hands-on thing as opposed to high-level management.
Yeah, that is hard, and that's I struggle with that constantly, because management is effort and takes time. And I've actually recently I've appointed one of the developers to help me manage the day-to-day of the software development, and it's changed my life. It's been such a good experience to actually delegate and get someone to help me.
So you're getting a project manager, really?
Yeah, he's actually doing the project management.
So a project manager, is the person that ultimately is responsible for the details. You're doing this and that. Yeah. You need to start here and finish that and finish on that day.
And you need to delegate.
Maybe. But it's in the details. It's not high level. Oh, we're just gonna, strategically develop a team that will do that. Who is in the team? When do they start? How much does it cost me? What do they need to know? Where do I get them? That's the project management. It's the details. Now, because Leah's job expanded, or blew up, or they saw that she can do more, they weren't sure about, what to expect from her, and then they saw she's capable, gave her more stuff. She's saying she got another person to help her to do the details. The details is project management, which is what we study here. Okay, so we're moving on to Agile Principle number 2. Welcome changing requirements. Okay, so managing change, we always talk about scope creep. So whereas it's always described as something horrible in project and something that you need to protect the schedule baseline against, and you need to protect the budget, and you need to protect the scope baseline against changes. In Agile, they say, you know what? Yes, change makes us work harder, but we embrace change. We welcome change. We want change because change is good. Change means that your customer or team member or somebody had noticed that something can be improved or done differently or done better. We accept it. We want it. Bring it on. We'll do it. Yeah, it's going to cost, blah, 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 but we want it. And when you do iteration of 2 weeks, what we call a sprint in Agile delivery, then it's easier to make those changes because you can just say, oh, you know what? Yeah, that's a good change. Let's just chuck it in the next sprint or 2 sprints from now. When it's in Waterfall, okay, you do the planning or the design, then you move to execution, you're building the house. Now, if somebody wants to add another room, it's kind of a problem, isn't it?
It's still a problem with Agile. I'd say one of the biggest challenges is that because you're supposed to welcome change, the business, and so the stakeholders and management, they think, well, you should just be able to change this, and this will change, and I want it done this way. Oh, and do this differently.
Can you give an example?
So we get our requirements from nurses, but very often when we first start talking, they don't actually still quite know what they want. So they'll say to us, oh, we need a report that tells us this, but they don't really know quite what they mean. And so we embrace that. And so we'll start a sprint and we'll estimate the tickets based on what we think is being asked for. But the important part of the puzzle then is when there's a change, we say, yes, okay, of course we can look at doing that differently, but the impact is this, and it means you'll have to remove something else. If you want us to do this additionally, we then have to take this piece of work out. And that takes up a substantial amount of my time, is juggling everything constantly because we think we're going to look at this, but then they want to do it differently. And it depends very much on your customer and user base, but ours are very fickle, and they'll say, yes, this is it. And I get them to sign off and say, are you sure this is what you want? And they'll say, yes, this is what we want. And you start working, and they're like, oh, hang on, no, I spoke to them and now we want it different. And that's okay, but as long as they understand what the impact is, and that I have to have really clear boundaries about, yes, we can change it, but it means we have to take this out. And they don't always like that, but it's important to do it that way. Otherwise, again, you're setting yourself up to fail because you can't just keep adding things in unlimited.
Okay. Well, in this course, when we teach the unit managed project scope and we develop a scope management plan, one of the things we do is we develop a process to manage change. It's got about maybe 6 steps. The first step being that anybody can propose a change to the scope of the project. Anybody can say, yeah, this, we can add this feature or do this in a different way. And then they submit a change request to the project manager. The project manager does an assessment. Maybe they need to get an evaluation or an estimate from one of the people who would actually be doing applying the change. Then they push it to a CCB, a change control board, which is just a group of people in big projects that, approve a change over a certain amount. And then they need to implement it, and then they need to update all the plans because they added, time, tasks, and then maybe they need to hire more people. I don't know. Do you have a change management process, or you just take it all and just do it in your own time and then just send emails and that's it?
No, absolutely, we do. And I would say the change management process is actually very much like that. And I think it's really important to have that process, again, to protect yourself from afterwards a stakeholder going, oh, but I wanted it this way. And you're like, well, actually, on this date, you came and said this to me and then signed it off. So that's why we changed it. And so every time there's a change, it gets documented, and I'll explain the impact and what it means we can't do, and they sign off on that. And it's a streamlined process. The change request would be like a paragraph, if that, and it just gets signed off by the CEO. But it's important to do that so that you're documenting the changes, because with Agile, there isn't the big documentation at the beginning. And so it's actually really important to document things as you go, so that, in 3 months' time, when people have moved on or they forget, you can go back and say, this is what happened.
Okay. Cool. Number 3, deliver working software frequently. How do you manage that?
Yes, so we try to do a release at least once a month.
A release once a month.
Yeah, and for Agile, that's actually not even that often. You know, I've spoken to people who deliver software twice a week. They're just little increments over and over. But we find once a month works well because, again, it means we can be responsive. So we'll have one of our facilities using the software will say, oh, this isn't working as it should, or we want this slightly differently. And then the next month we can actually deliver it to them. And that goes a long way in building a sense to them that they are important to us and building sort of loyalty.
Yeah, I'll just tell a counterpoint story. So in 2007, I was working as a project manager for a software development company, and we were building websites for customers. And we were using Waterfall methodology, so that we would, define the requirements. Then we'd go into design. When the design was approved, somebody would build the HTML pages, and then a developer would build a database and integrate them and build a website, basically. And then QA and launch. But what would happen is, because this would take months, by the time the website was up, they would say, oh, I actually want it to be like something else that they saw online, or I actually don't like it. Yeah. Or they would say, or maybe the roles changed because it's taken 6 months. So the person who was the project owner on the client side is no longer there. And then the other person really likes green. or there should be a customer zone. The clients should be able to log into the client's area and see all the something that they don't really need, or we should start using something that they saw somewhere else because they think it's cool, or there should be an animation of something, God knows why. So this is what Agile does, is it's a frequent delivery of bits of software. Here's a version, here's a version, here's a version. You got something to say? Yes, good, let's put it in the next sprint or the one after. We don't need to wait 6 months and because that just costs money. And
it means you're constantly working on what's the highest priority, because you've only really agreed what you're doing for the next 2 weeks. And then based on what you've delivered that sprint, you can say, actually, for the next 2 weeks, we need to go back to this and do more work on it, and something else can wait. Or we were going to look at this, but now this is more important. So it means you're constantly working on what's highest priority.
Number 4, business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Is this something that's happening, or?
It's probably one of my biggest struggles, actually, in that the business is made up of nurses and nurses, yeah.
But nurses are not the business people.
Well, the nurses are. We have nurses who work in the facilities, helping with clinical monitoring and whatnot, and they're who give us the requirements. So I tend to be the face with the business, and I'm constantly trying to get more face time between the business and the developers. But I'll be honest, the business don't like to spend time with them.
Okay, so that's not really easy always. Yeah, this is why we're teaching here the diploma of IT with the business analysis specialization, and this is one of the things that they focus on, is being a bridge between business and technology.
And I think it's really important, and if you can show you've got the skill set to actually talk to both or be both, because there are people in IT who've got really, really good business sense and can really speak to the business and understand, and then translate that into what they're doing in the software. And I think that's a really, really valuable skill that will take you far.
I agree. All right, number 5, build projects around motivated individuals. So basically that means that the project, Agile can only work if you have motivated individuals who are skillful. And do you have that?
We've definitely been working towards that, yes. And I'd say there was a period last year when it didn't feel that way so much. We were building up a new team, and we were seen as being quite separate from the rest of the company. Again, as I said, there's this disconnect between the developers and the business. But I think if you're going to get the best out of the development team, they need to feel a part of the business. They need to know why they're doing what they're doing, and they need to feel invested in it themselves. So I've put a lot of effort into trying to bridge that gap. And even though the business aren't that available to spend time with the developers, I make it a big part of what I do to let the developers know about what's going on in the business and what the priorities are and why they're doing certain things, so that they feel part of it and not just people sitting at a desk, pushing out.
Yes, code. And that provides the motivation because they're part of something, they care about it.
That's really important.
The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Absolutely. That's challenging in the days of COVID, isn't it?
And it's challenging working remotely as well. I used to think I was for working completely remotely and we don't need to be in the same room. And yet I now see that when we actually spend time in the same room, the problem solving that we do we do so much more than when we're all working remotely at home. There's something about collaborating.
It's amazing, that
face-to-face.
thing.
Yeah, that human connection, it takes productivity up tenfold.
It's really amazing. There's something about people, isn't it? That's beyond the technology. There's so many technological solutions now that would allow us to never speak to each other again. We check out of the supermarket, we don't need to talk to anyone, and when we don't have to go anywhere really anymore. But there is something beyond that, and I don't know what you call that thing. Okay. Working software is the primary measure of progress. That's a tough one.
Yes, I mean, I suppose it is, but I would go one step further and say it's customers buying your software and income coming in from the software, because ultimately that's the end goal, is to be providing the business with an income.
Okay. Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsor developers and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. Okay, I'm going to ignore that. Just because there's nothing to say about that at this point. I think continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility.
That's absolutely true, yes. And we've learned this the hard way. Our software was built, as I mentioned, sort of over 18 to 24 months by a series of 3 external consultants. And I think if you're an external consultant building software for a client, the focus is very different to if you're building it in-house. You're not building it for longevity or ease of maintenance going forward. You're trying to build it quickly and cheaply so that you can then move on to the next project. And we've definitely experienced that. And there's been a lot of problems with how the software was written. It's more of a proof of concept, really, than a robust piece of software. And we're now trying to change that. And so we're very strict about making sure that we follow best practice, because it increases the speed of delivery going forwards, so we're taking longer now because we're going back and fixing a lot of things that aren't written as they should be, but thinking about we need to make sure that development in the future is faster and more robust.
Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential.
Yes.
So how do you filter out what you don't need to do and keep it simple?
Yeah. That's a difficult thing to do, but it's all about constantly asking questions and trying to understand what's really the need behind the requirement, because you can be told, I want this, but then it's really important to actually understand, what do they actually want? What's the business process, or what's the goal that they want to achieve, which is making them ask for something? Because often they're asking for it because they've done it this way in the past. It's not actually what they need. And I'll give a good example where, when the system was originally built, the nurses would give the external consultants spreadsheets and say, this is the spreadsheet we do our monitoring on. We want this in an application. And so they basically created spreadsheets in an application. And it doesn't work as well as a spreadsheet does, because the spreadsheet did what it needed to.
They're trying to build a stupid Excel.
Yes. And so we've gone, actually, it does this, but what you're actually wanting to do here is this, and so let's revisit that and simplify it and do it differently.
Okay. The best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. I don't know. I'll check the last one. At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Is there any self-reflection, do you think, for the team?
Yes, absolutely. So every 2 weeks, we spend an hour, and we call it a retrospective. Again, that's just a standard Agile term. And we discuss, I make it really important that we actually celebrate our successes as well, and recognize what we did well as a team, or what we're proud of, or what someone else achieved, and to note that before you then go into what could we do differently, what could we improve? Because one of the things behind Agile is continuous improvement, and you can only do that if you're constantly reflecting on what you did do.
Okay. All right, well, that's about wraps it up. We're just up to the 1 hour that we wanted to. Do you want to add anything?
Well, I'm happy to answer questions if anyone's got any questions.
in your time, what have you find most frustrating or hardest to work with, or what's been like your biggest pain point so far, maybe perhaps in this new role?
I would say it's probably something that generally comes in the territory of being a project manager, which is the fact that you're often dealing with fixed cost, scope, and quality, and having to somehow make the impossible happen within that, because you're generally not in charge of the budgets and you're not in charge of deliverables. So that's really difficult, and that's where I've just tried slowly to influence those things, and I think that comes through time by building up trust, making sure that senior management trust my viewpoint and they know that I've got the business's best interests at heart, and then sort of using that influence over time to make things a little bit easier. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Leah.
And good luck, everyone. I think it's really important to do the study, because then it gives you the language that you need when you're going in to chat with people, whatever, that you know what you're talking about.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to finish the recording now.